This is my cousin, Sarah Branch. During her time as a D1 athlete, she was known as Sarah Stelzer. So, Sarah, why don't you give us just a little bit of background on your upbringing, kind of like some of the sports that you participated in? Give us a little background into who you are.
Yeah, so thank you, Rachel, for having me and for all these questions. It's nice to reflect on. So, growing up, I was playing soccer to start and swimming to start. And then once I got to middle school, I decided that volleyball was the way to go. So, I got into club volleyball. Of course, I got into school volleyball. And in between seasons, I would go back and forth between track, but quite honestly, I didn't like to run that much. And we went to a small school and I couldn't just throw javelin. So I was like, I don't want to run the 400 every weekend and play a volleyball tournament. So I just decided, you know what? Volleyball is the way to go. So I stuck with volleyball. And my senior year, I had tried out for a Division II school and they put me on their JV team. And so I didn't want to play at this Adams State, and it was kind of in the middle of a small community where it was just a Sonic, just a Walmart. And I was like, no, I'll just stay home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so after that, I got asked to walk on to the UNM team. Just in my club year, I was just doing it for fun. And so they asked me to walk on, and I decided to stay at the University of New Mexico and walk on as a DS for the Lobos.
Nice, awesome. So, have are you familiar with FCA? Have you heard of that club, that name, Fellowship of Christian Athletes?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Because that's what this club is. We just started it. This is our first year. So all students on our student body are invited to join us. But we unashamedly target athletes. And then we do kind of talk about faith based. Like that's our like practical is kind of our thing. Like how can you like basically represent Christ as an athlete? So can you kind of give us a little bit of kind of perspective on being an athlete and being a Christian? What was that like for you in college?
Yes. So two different worlds. So for me in high school, I went to Hope Christian High School in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So praying before games was essential. We did devotionals. We had Christian leadership. So it was very good environment to grow up in, very good environment to play sports in.
Mm.
And then when I went to club, those girls were from all over the state. They weren't just from Hope Christian. So I don't know how we got away with this at the time, but I vividly remember me and my really good friend at the time wanted to pray with our club teammates before every game after we'd shake our hands. And these were girls who went to a lot of different schools and had a lot of different beliefs. And somehow we were able to do it. Now, I know today's day and age is a lot different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know how kiddos would go through it. But we did have a group of kids who were athletes, who were Christian athletes. So we do devotionals and stuff like that together with a select few of us. And then when I got to UNM, of course, it's a very liberal college, a Division I college, but there were a couple Christians on the team.
Sure.
So those of us who we were able to, we not that it was kept hush hush, but it wasn't as open as Hope. Like you didn't get to talk to that level that we were used to. And so it was a little more almost secretive once you get to college, and you had to have a specific group of friends, a close group of friends or your family to talk about anything Christian once we got to that level.
Sure. Sure. Well, I think that's awesome that you were still able to maintain that, even in on a bigger stage.
Mm-hmm.
I think that speaks volumes. I had a couple questions from some of our students and our coaches, so I kind of wanted to open it up to you. McKenna asked, "What is it like being a D1 athlete?" And kind of piggybacking off of that, there was also like, can you give us an average day, what it looks like, a day in the life of a D1 athlete, maybe like in season versus out of season?
Sure. So first of all, being a Division I athlete is very humbling. You are the best at your school, you're the best at your club. You get onto this stage. It's such an honor to be in these gyms that you see on like TV, and then you're nobody and you're starting from the bottom, and it's grueling, and preseason starts and you get a new pair of shoes, and you're doing 8-hour days in preseason and your toes are bloody from these new shoes, and it's just a shock. Like, it's a real shock. So a day in the life of a regular school year in season, you have to make sure that when you schedule your classes, they're before practice times. Different teams practice at different times. But we had to plan around. We had weight training every day and we had practice every day. So we had a total of 4 hours of our volleyball activities. And then on top of that, we had to do 2 more hours of study hall. So I'd wake up in the morning. I'd try to go get breakfast if I was being good. I'd go eat breakfast, go to the mess hall, call my mom. I was very close with my mom, so still am. We'd talk in the mornings, go to my classes. I had a full schedule, but in college, you do like 2 to 3 classes a day. And then you get out about 2 o'clock, 1 to 2 o'clock. You go back to your room. You have to make sure you have the right color jersey because you always match every single day, and you don't even dare think of bringing the wrong shirt, heaven forbid. And then I had a vehicle. Sometimes a lot of the girls didn't. So I would take, 5 girls over to weight training, which was by our football stadium, like a couple minutes away from our dorms. We'd weight train for 2 hours. And we had trainers. And so we'd do a full 2-hour workout. And then we'd get our stuff and leave from the workout, drive back to campus, have 2 more hours of practice. After our 2 hours of practice, we had the ice bath, and it was literally the worst, but we'd ice bath, shower, change, go across campus again to study hall because we had mandatory study hall. So then you finish the day. Hopefully you got your homework done. If you were like me, you got nothing done in study hall and it was social hour.
Yes.
And then you'd go back to your dorm and do some more homework and studying. If it was off season, we usually have our classes that we can kind of do whenever. However, you do have practice, but it's more fun practice. It's like we get to play dodgeball, or we get to play kickball, or we get to do some kind of team bonding outside of we do like an hour practice and then do team bonding. And in the summers, we for sure had weight training still. And maybe it would just be weight training or just be practice. So it was a little more sporadic than in season.
Okay, cool. And then Mrs. P asked, how did you get recruited and become, to be a part of a D1 program? What was that process like?
Sure. So, the University of New Mexico always has camps, which I had gone to since 5th grade.
I think we went to a couple together when we were kids. Yeah,
we did. We did those same summer camps. So the best thing to do is get into the summer camps, know the coaches, know the girls, because you need to understand the organization. So I had been going since 5th grade all the way up till senior year. So they had seen me. But at the time, our coaches were actually players on UNM because they kind of fed into if it's off season for the UNM players, you're coaching kids. They didn't do that when I got there, but that's what I had. And so I talked to my coach, who was also a coach at UNM, but at the time she was my club coach. And I sat down and I said, okay, my dream has always been a Lobo. I always have wanted to be a Division I athlete. And she looked at me and she's like, with love and respect, she told me I wasn't good enough. And she told me I needed to go to JUCO or Division II. And it broke my heart because it was my dream. And so I was like, okay, God, my heart is broken, but it's up to you. Okay, let's just do this. So my mom and I got a video together, took some videos at some of the club tournaments my junior year. And then once that video was together, I wrote a letter and I just sent it out to a bunch of coaches. So Wisconsin, UNM. I got a couple responses at some D2 places, a couple JUCOs. I got a response from Wisconsin that they wanted me to come out and just practice with them. And I never ended up doing that. And then in Adams State, we had a summer camp. And so the coach saw me and she heard I was looking to be recruited. And so she asked me to come to tryouts. And then that's honestly when they told me that I was on a JV team. And I remember laying in bed and just being like, God, if you want my journey of volleyball to end, I trust you. Like, you have gotten me this far. And so I'm going to let it go. And it was really hard to just sit there and understand that I just let go of something I've been chasing for so long. And I had a conversation with my mom that I didn't want to go play JV anywhere. And she was like, okay, do you want to do club your senior year? Because it is expensive. And I was like, no. And she's like, I think you'll regret it if you don't. And so I'm like, okay, I made a twos team. I wasn't even on a ones team. And I was just playing for fun. Well, at the time, we had a local tournament at the University of New Mexico, and I was playing as an outside hitter all the way around, and something happened where the head coach of UNM was in that gym, and he started watching me, and he didn't stop watching me. And so after that game, he had a conversation with my coach, who was his player, and a conversation with my mom, and they decided that they wanted me to walk on as a UNM athlete. And I had totally just given it up to God. And I'm like, well, I guess we're just going to have fun this year. And then there was like hope again that I could continue playing.
That's such an awesome story. That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question. I didn't write down who it was from, but what are the biggest expectation changes from high school to college?
So the biggest changes from high school to college. First of all, going from Hope Christian High School to a very liberal University of New Mexico, I remember that I was in my first freshman class and the professor swore at us, and I was just like, oh my gosh, my little like Hope Christian ears like couldn't handle it.
Right.
It's very much like I remember going into college with a purity ring, because that's what everyone did at Hope, right? Everyone got a purity ring, and then I get to college and I was being made fun of in the locker room.
Right.
And the girls were kind of heckling me and harassing me, and I began to feel embarrassed. And I didn't have anyone to talk to, and said, Sara, like, you are okay. Like, it is okay to be the only one doing what you're doing and standing up what you're standing up for. However, I took the ring off and I'm like, I am so embarrassed. I'm never putting this on again. And so it's a hard transition. Also, too, like you go to school because your parents make you, and then you get to college where no one cares if you're in class or not. Right. And my personality is like, if I don't have to be there, I'm not going to be there. Right. So I began ditching class and getting my grades into trouble. So there's no structure in college. The only thing that had structure for me was sports, which is why I continued to excel at it. But the school struggled because I had no one to tell me what to do, because I could sleep in if I wanted. And guess what? No one cares.
Right.
Until I got in trouble, and my coaches saw my attendance and my grades, and then I got in a bunch of trouble. So it was kind of a culture shock having so much freedom, being under a strict house in a strict school, and then having so much freedom in a really liberal place where you can't be wearing a purity ring and talking about certain things. So it was like dizzying and confusing and a little too much freedom at the time.
Okay, cool. And then following up with that, Nina asked, how was your faith impacted during college?
Yeah, so that kind of goes to what I was telling you about. Basically, the fundamentals that I went in, and everyone at Hope Christian High School was saying, this is good, save yourself for marriage, do good things. I know our high school's statement was to send Christ-centered, passionate leaders to change the world. And I go to a Division I school where I'm nobody. I'm getting made fun of for the things I believe in. I got a concussion right off the bat. And I was on bed rest for weeks. I couldn't see the TV or screens. I could barely read. I missed a bunch of school. So I just remember sitting alone in my room with this concussion and opening my Bible and just starting to post Bible verses on Facebook. And God just started speaking to me in the like darkest room where I felt like no one could see me, no one could hear me. I was sad, I was depressed, but yet he still spoke to me and I was able to cling to his word. But I kind of had to be separated from everyone else telling me that what I believed in was bad, to being sad and alone. And he's like, I'm still here. Mm-hmm. Like, these people aren't even close to you. I'm still here. Like, cling to me.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things where, like, there were times like I really wanted to walk away, and there were times I did, and I dabbled in things that, you know, I wouldn't dabble in today.
Yeah.
And I kind of did. My sophomore year, I got thrown out of the locker room in Wyoming. And it was one of those things where it was just like, I don't care about anything anymore. And who cares if I do drugs? Who cares if I sleep around? Who cares if I do whatever? But that, following that, was empty. It was more depressing than my concussions. It was empty. It was lonely. It was whatever. However, I was with my now husband.
Yeah.
And I was able to say, Brandon, like, this is not what we believe in. This is not the track we're on. We need to get in line. And it was falling in love with my husband that I'm like, I love you. And the track we're on right now is not the right one.
Yeah.
And we almost broke up. We really did. So it was a struggle. It was a test of faith. But I know my mom was always praying for me. I knew people around me were always praying for me because there were some really bad situations I got myself into, and yet I was saved. And I could have really gotten hurt, and some really bad things could have happened. But for some reason, I was preserved, and I was set apart from a lot of my friends who unfortunately weren't able to escape that.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. You touched on Brandon. So a lot of them, we had told them that you guys are married and you both were D1 athletes. So what was that like? What was that experience like, dating? And you guys were both, so Brandon played D1 football at UNM. You played D1 volleyball. Those seasons happen at the same time. So what was that like, dating as D1 athletes?
Yeah. So it was really different. So as you remember, I dated someone in high school who was also on his way to play college basketball. He ended up cheating on me and all this stuff happened, but we were supposed to be getting married after high school. We were, you know, Christians and like all serious. And he got mad that I was a Division I, you know, recruit, and he went to a D2 college. And so it just ended poorly, very manipulative, very like jealous. And then when I get to college and I met Brandon, there was just no jealousy. There was no, you know, shame on you for getting attention. Like, he was so happy to see me on the court. He was so happy to see me, like, kicking butt, whatever I did. And then in turn, I got to go to his games. But football and volleyball are the same season.
Right.
So what was cool was, like, a couple of games, like, we were in the same conference, obviously, like, football was playing at San Diego State and volleyball was playing at San Diego State. So we'd go and get to watch 5 minutes of his game, or he'd come and watch my game. So it was nice because then in the off season too, we could hang out all the time. And our seasons were together. Our pre-seasons were at the same time. Pre-season's hard too as well, but it was just, there was no jealousy or animosity. We both went to private schools. We had very similar upbringings. Same with siblings. So it was just like meant to be. Yeah. And it wasn't a struggle. If it's a struggle, you probably shouldn't be in it in the first place, because you got to focus on school and sports or whatever it is first. Right. And if something's making you regret or struggle that, then it's not for you.
Right. Or it could be right person, wrong time, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right person, wrong time. Like, it's just, you gotta unless there's a ring on your finger,
right,
you gotta focus on your grades, you gotta focus on, you know, whatever, unless you're really contemplating marriage. But the thing is, you have to go into dating prepared for married, or else, you know, you could be doing whatever and this guy doesn't care about you, which is like so unfortunate, or girl, vice versa too. Right. So yeah, I think both Brandon and I, we didn't want to mess around. Like, we were pretty adamant that we wanted to have a person and stick with that person.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we had Kaden. She asked, "How did you incorporate your faith into your everyday life as an athlete?"
Yeah, so that's a great question. For me, it was really being in the Word. And I wish I could say I was in it more, but it
Mm,
was mostly when I was hurting. And so my advice to give would be stay in it every day before you're hurting,
mm,
so that when you're hurting, you already have that and you're not like going back to it
right.
like already broken and hurting.
Yeah.
And so when things were good and great, I was, doing me, doing my own thing, doing what I wanted to do. And then like the concussions happened and I was out. And then a second concussion happened and I was out again. It was just like, that's the only time I would turn to God. And
Right.
so I wasted a lot of time just doing me.
Okay.
And that's unfortunate, but you know what? I'm still here today, so that's good.
No, that's awesome. Araya, she asked, "How did being a D1 athlete affect your emotional and mental health?"
I just laugh because it was a lot of depression. It was a lot of depression. We had a very, I'm just going to say it, like an evil head coach.
Yeah.
He is just the worst human, the absolute worst. He was just very manipulative and awful and degrading. And I thought it was just me struggling with depression. And then I leave the program, and years down the road, we're all coaches and are like, hey, I was struggling with depression. Were you? Yes. You were too? Yes, you were too. We were all struggling. And it's like, why didn't we talk about this before? But what happened was, if you were struggling with depression, they just send you to a sports psychologist, and sports psychologist is focused on sports. So what do we need to do to get you back in there as soon as possible? Not how are you? What's going on? Talk to me about it. So it's one of those things, like if you are struggling with depression, if you are struggling with anxiety, you're not the only one. And if you get a person to talk to about it with it, it's so much better. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can have longevity. I didn't get the longevity.
Right.
I only lasted to the end of my sophomore year because it was just so bad and I kept it in for so long. And then realizing it years later, I'm like, we could have totally talked about this and been okay.
Yeah.
So it was a lot. It was hard, and the coach now is great, and he focuses on mental health. And I think the new generation of coaches put more of a priority on mental health. But if you're interested to going to a Division 1 school or D2, ask the coach on your recruiting trip what services they offer for students with mental health,
Mm.
and ask the girls, because you stay with the girls or the guys too, and talk to them, because if they're saying there's nothing or they're saying there's an issue, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Don't go there. Like, the ones who care will be open and willing to talk about it with you during the recruiting trip.
For sure. I think that's important because I think that is an aspect that a lot of people overlook. And then when
Yeah.
you're like in the trenches, you're like, what do I do? So it's great
Yes.
that they have that. Kind of following up with that, someone asked, "Did you ever think about quitting?"
I didn't until I had to, if
Right.
that makes sense. So you don't, because things, can get tough and get hard, but you're like, I worked my whole life for this. Like, if I stop now, then what?
Right.
Then what do I do? It's like an existential crisis,
Mm-hmm.
because you've worked so hard. Um, but the thing is, like, if you find a good program and it's a good fit, then there's no reason for you to be worried about quitting. But if you're in chaos and you're in darkness and you have a terrible coach and it's just spiraling out of control, I wish someone would have told me to go to a different school.
Yeah.
But I was the first of my family. I mean, me and Steven were the only, at the time, Katie had her college, but she was focusing on nursing. I had no idea of what I was focusing, or
Right.
PE at the time.
Yeah.
PE. I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I'm like, if I quit, what the heck am I going to do?
Right.
So there was no plan. And then once everything happened and escalated my sophomore year, I was forced to make a plan. And it's like, if I was in the right place at the right time, things could have been laid out better. But it was just chaos and darkness and stress and confusion. And I didn't have the support I needed set up. So there was that safety. Whereas Brandon, he had 4 brothers who played Division 1. His dad was a Division 1 athlete. They know the recruiting process. They know what it takes. And he had such a solid foundation of being a multi-generation Division 1 athlete, to where his older brother is a pro football player.
Right.
So he knew, and talking to him, I'm like, I wish we could have talked about this when I was in college, because I was new. Like, no one had that experience. The only one, was, Katie and Steven and you, but it was one of those things where you suffer silently and you don't know who you can talk to. So that support is good, and knowledge. If you have like a mentor or a brother or sister or someone above you who knows it, plug into them, bug them, and do not leave them alone, because then you know, and you have that foresight ahead of you. I didn't know what I was getting myself into.
Right. The realistic expectation of what a commitment it is, and kind of like what you're getting yourself into. Yes. For sure. All right, yes. Let's see. We had Coach Burns. He asked, what challenged your faith most being involved in college athletics?
Ooh, what challenged my faith most? I think at the time, I didn't really have a testimony. Mm-hmm. I'd grown up in a Christian school. I had gone to church my whole life. So there was just like a very ABCD, XYZ relationship with God. And so when people would question things, or people would, come to me or press me about something, I had like verses that I memorized over the years, but I didn't have a testimony. Okay. Whereas now there's more of a walk and a testimony, and because of trial by fire. Mm-hmm. And so knowing your testimony and knowing why, and not being like, well, because my mom sent me to the school for the past 12 years and I go to church. Right. That helps. That really does help. And that's why this group that you guys have is awesome. And this conversation is awesome, because it's more relationship based than XYZ ABC. For sure. So I think that testimony and just that textbook knowledge, it's not as helpful as you think it could be.
Yeah, for sure. One last thing before we go. So we have, this group is very diverse. We have boys, we have girls, we have multi-sport athletes, we have single sport athletes. Our upperclassmen are very, actually, our girls just won basketball states. So job, a lot of them are probably going to be in the next, short few months, if they haven't already committed, they're going to be looking at colleges, potentially going off. Our juniors are looking ahead to next year. If you could leave one tidbit of advice or wisdom, what would that be?
Wow, that is awesome. My advice for you is that it's very difficult to make it to the professionals. Mm. So you need to understand how much money you want to make out of college. What do you see yourself doing? Because if you want to do X, Y, and Z, like I want to be an NBA player, the percentage is low. For girls, the percentage is extremely low. My girlfriends who played overseas and did make it, they make less than a teacher's salary, and they had to wait tables. So what is your end game? Like, why do you want to play college athletics? There's so much resume builders, like teamship, sportsmanship. You could go off and do national championships. That's great. That's awesome. But what is the end game? Like, you can't bank on the fact that every kid in the school is going to the NFL, because they're not. Right. They're not. And so it's like, what is the long game here? And don't lose focus of your education. Don't lose focus of your relationships. Just because you make it that far, we as Christians have a bigger purpose. Right. If we were to die today, what would you be leaving behind? Is it athletics, or is it your family and your friends, and a healthy income for your children if you were to pass away. So I know it's everything to us when we're high school and we want to get out of the house, we want to have freedom, and we want to ball out at all the games and
Right.
like be cool and wear the jersey and have the, that's great. Live it, love it, celebrate it, enjoy it. But there's an ending to all of it, and
Right.
you have to be confident in what you're going to do. And my best advice is that if you want to make money in college, if you want to make money after college, get into coaching,
Yeah.
because you pouring into someone else is the best gift that you can give back. And we're here in Salt Lake City, Utah this weekend, coaching, and it's amazing to give back. So definitely get into coaching, even ref if you can. Just pour into someone else while you're there.
Awesome. That's so great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your experience with all of our kids.